everyone, and welcome to another episode of From the Ground Up. I'm your host today, Karol Weyman from Outdoor Coffee Shop, and we're sitting down with John Kenney from Cotney Consulting Group to break down the legal, safety, and compliance changes that affect contractors and outdoor construction projects. So I think, first off, John, thank you so much for being here. You're a crowd favorite, and we'd love you to introduce yourself.
Well, sure. I was always happy to be here. Thanks for having me back again. My name is John Kenney. I'm CEO of Cotney Consulting Group. I was a contractor for over 45 years in the construction industry, and now I work with contractors and individuals within the industry for education, training, business operations, and basically just navigating through all the challenges that are always out there facing businesses, regardless what decade it ever is. It always seems like there's new challenges in every decade. So we're here to try to give some light into where we're at today.
Yeah, thanks again. And if John Kenney is also an influencer on all the coffee shops, so we're always really happy to be able to pick his mind and be able to talk about some of the bigger issues in the construction industry. So we're just going to dig in. What regulatory changes should contractors be paying the closest attention to right now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I think one of the biggest mistakes contractors make is the assumption that compliance only affects the larger companies. And honestly, the reality is regulatory changes impact everybody, regardless of size. You have to always be in that mindset that you've got to be able to be in compliance. So, what I'm looking at right now, what I'm watching are four major areas. One, first is labor and employment regulations, which is worker classification, overtime rules, and documenting requirements that continue to evolve. And I see a lot of contractors, especially, get into trouble in worker classification and overtime rules. That's one of the big, easy ones to do. Second, we have safety compliance, which never goes away, and it shouldn't. It's an important part of all our industries. But OSHA isn't creating an entirely new rule book every year. And especially we talk about now with the new administration, OSHA's kind of people think are lax. They're really not. But they're increasing enforcement. So why rules may not be changing, definitely the enforcement is. They're more aggressively going after enforcement because they're a self-funding, lack of a better word, mid part of the administration. Heat illness prevention, fall protection, trenching, and documentation continue to receive a great deal of attention. That's where you're seeing your fines right now. Heat illness prevention, how you're handling that. Fall protection is always big. Trenching is huge now. They're really enforcing heavy. And of course, we forget about documentation. That falls under administrative portion of the OSHA code. And there's a lot of crazy fines that you get on there for just not following your paperwork. Then I think third is the environment of compliance, like stormwater management, erosion control, runoff protection, material disposal requirements. They're becoming more stringent in a lot of areas. Understand that it's not just federal regulation, there's state regulations on top of that. So that's why you have to understand where you're operating in and what the actual regulations are. And then I see the last one that definitely is finally local permitting and licensing requirements continue to become more complex. We think about technology making things easier, but definitely on the permitting side, I haven't seen that yet. Contractors work across multiple cities and counties, and they need to understand that every jurisdiction may have different rules. That's a big one. Don't ever make an assumption that if it's a statewide rule, that there can't be local compliance on top of that. There absolutely can. And then I think bottom line is simple. Compliance isn't just about avoiding fines anymore. It's about protecting your business. So if you think about it as a protection of your own company, I think definitely you'll see these areas we're going to be talking about how they work.
Wow, yeah. So it's federal, state, local, and then
Yep.
there has to be other, as contractors, as they're seeing things, they probably add their own, not official compliance, but there's rules within. So there's a lot
Sure.
built up for that. So how are labor laws, worker classification rules, and safety requirements changing the way contractors are managing their teams?
So I think today's contractor has to be much more structured than even we were 10 years ago. So a lot of times we talk about how we have to go, it's not the same as it was 20, 30 years ago. I think it's within 10 years. I don't think you have to go back that far. Things are different now than they were in the early 2000s for sure. So worker classification is one of the biggest issues that I see. Many contractors still don't fully understand the difference between an employee and an independent contractor, and misclassification become very expensive. So that happens a lot. We get a lot of contractors say, "Well, I'm using subs, like I'm more of a general contractor model, and I got subcontractors," when truly you don't, because they're direct employees. They're working for you, even though you may have them classified as sub, and that comes into a lot of just direction and a lot of things. We could do a whole new podcast for sure just on that. But we're also seeing increased expectations for documented training, safety meetings, and employee records. So this is something you can do. We've talked about this on other podcasts that you need to start doing, but you want to keep documentation. Excuse me. Managing people today isn't just assigning work. You have to, it's documenting the training, documenting their performance, safety documentation, the incidents that happen along with your crews. And what I can say about that is good documentation protects both the employee and the employer. These are actually gold when it comes down to disputes or problems that are going to come. And I think what I find most, the contractors that embrace systems are finding compliance much easier than those trying to manage everything from memory. So again, if you can embrace the fact that you've got to do this, your life becomes a lot easier in the fact of how you're going to run your company.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's good information. So, what licensing updates or permitting requirements can catch contractors off guard, especially when working across multiple jurisdictions?
So I think this happens more than people realize. As a contractor, you may assume that because they're licensed in one county or in one state or even one town for that matter, you're good to go. But that's actually rarely the case. Often different municipalities have different permitting requirements. Some will definitely require separate contract registrations for the contractor, so you have to register in these different areas, and then you're gonna find others require specialty license, like for irrigation, electrical work, pool construction, tree removal, excuse me, lightning installs. And I'm finding this not just in a lot of states that we like, give you example, Florida has licensing for different contractors, but I'm seeing this start to move to a lot of other states as well, where they're really trying to specialize the licensing for the different areas and the requirements. So I think some areas have very specific inspection requirements before work can continue, and a lot of areas don't. There's still a lot of areas out there that are fairly loose. So the best advice that I can give contractors, I think is pretty simple. Don't ever assume. If you're old enough and you've watched TV, you know what happens when you assume, so don't do that. And you want to verify everything before you mobilize. Once you get onto the job site, the game's over if you haven't done what you need to do up front. So look at it this way. If you can take an hour to understand local requirements of where you're going to work, you will save weeks of delay and thousands of dollars later. So I want you to look at it that way. This is not something that's going to be a hindrance to your business. If you understand it, it actually can help you make money and save delays.
Yeah, that's great advice. So, how have insurance and liability expectations changed for contractors performing outdoor projects?
Well, that's a good one. Insurance definitely has become much more than simply carrying a policy. It used to be if you had your insurance coverage, we got our certificate of insurance, we're good to go. I'm starting to see owners that are reviewing certificates more carefully. They're making sure that they are actually legitimate, have all the coverage. They're not just a pass through anymore. I'm seeing contracts that are requiring higher limits because everybody wants to, the old push down, flow down. I want to get as much liability down. So you're going to have to cover more coverage to do it. You're watching additionally insured endorsements that are becoming more and more common. And again, I want to caution everybody out there that additionally insured has so much liability for you. Make sure you're covered on your main policy by what is being asked of you. You have waivers of subrogation, completed operations coverage, which a lot of people don't even realize they're required to carry, which means you're basically got insurance coverage while you're giving your warranty. So if I got a 1 year warranty in my work and I have completed operations coverage requirement, my insurance has to cover me throughout that. It's just not a simple contractor's warranty. I'm seeing more and more, and I recommend that all contractors look into this, some sort of cyber coverage for their company, because there is more and more problems out there with people being you're thinking it's only large companies that get held hijacked? No, it's not. It's your weekly payrolls that are getting held up. It's not just people going after big, they're hitting little, and you wanna make sure that you're covered if your data is stolen. Remember, you're a keeper of data as well. And also professional liability in certain situations, like errors and omissions. What I caution contractors on is to understand when they're putting their own proposal in and there's not a designer involved, you then become by law the designer of record, which means you're taking on more
Mm.
responsibility because you specified the project. So a lot of times this coverage can be very cheap in comparison of not covering it for your company. So again, talk to your agent. You should have a good agent partner and run through what's an advantage to you and your company. And I think contractors need to understand what they're agreeing to before they're signing these contracts. I know we did a podcast a while ago just on contracts, but understand it's more than just all the legal jargon that's in there. It's also these insurance requirements. So I've seen companies unknowingly accept liability that wasn't covered under their insurance policy. So insurance should be reviewed alongside the contract, not after something goes wrong. Don't that's where we always say, "Oh, well, it's there when I need it." But if you don't have the coverage, you don't have it when you need it.
Wow. And just, when you mentioned the cyber insurance, it just triggered something like how important that is across everything. But, as long as you have data, you're going to be at risk. So I think that's very
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah, for sure. So, what environmental regulations should contractors understand when it comes to drainage, runoff, materials, and site protection, et cetera?
Sure. So environmental compliance is becoming increasingly important. It's not something that we look at from a standpoint of, well, things change. It's nobody's really looking at it today. They were looking at it more yesterday. It's not true. The laws are still in the books. The compliance is still there. People, uh, simple things like protecting storm drains, controlling erosion, storing fuels properly. Now, we forget about having make sure our gas cans and our other items are actually in proper containers that's required. And you want to prevent sediment runoff that can become major issues if overlooked. So if I'm digging on one side of property and we get a heavy rainstorm and my sediment runs down and gets into a brook or a stream or something, it could cost you a lot of problems. Or even now, a lot of local regulatory administrations have stormwater protection regulations they don't want it getting in there. So a lot of things that we have to look at, but many outdoor contractors absolutely disturb soil. I don't know how you could be an outdoor contractor without doing it. So that means protecting neighboring properties and waterways become part of your job, not an afterthought, but part of it. Material disposal is another area that catches people off guards, like concrete washout, chemical storage, pool chemicals, landscape debris, construction waste, and goes on and on. Different jurisdictions have different disposal requirements. So again, understand what you're getting into. Simple phone call or little research on a website can definitely serve you very well. A good environmental practices don't just satisfy regulators, they're going to demonstrate professionalism to your customers. Believe it or not, most clients, I just to give you an example, I always like to use personal examples. I just had my annual cleaning yesterday, my HVA system on my home, and I had a lot of questions, and they explained the process to me of how they do things, and there were some chemicals involved, and I didn't even ask that, but they went through the whole process. And you know what? What that meant to me as a homeowner in that instance, my liability, I don't have liability because they explained to me the process and they're going to stick to it. So I think these are important to put them as part of your business going to business plan rather than look at it as just, "Oh, I'm complying to a regulation."
Right, and it's really great to have the people that come to your home that are working not only have an understanding of how to clean or how to how to do the work, but to be able to answer the client's questions. Because with AI, honestly, I like put that in like what questions should I ask a contractor that's coming to your home, and so now you have all this stuff, and you really need to have a place. You really have to educate the contractor to be able to answer those questions. So that should really be like kinda at their fingertips so that they're able to answer that question and be prepared 'cause the
Yep.
homeowners are just becoming more demanding and more educated.
Well, you brought up a great point on AI. Let me go a little deeper on that. I actually recommend that a contractor runs those same questions through their own AI before they even go, because they're gonna know exactly what the homeowner's going to ask them because they will. And you're correct on that. Homeowners are using artificial intelligence, Chat GPT and Google and all the different ones that are out there more and more. They already know they may not know the correct answer to the question they're asking, but they have an answer given to them through AI. So at least if you're prepared for when the situation arises.
Right, and you can educate them if they think that this is supposed to be the answer. You say, "Well, if you go through AI, this is what's gonna happen," or when you ask the question on the
Sure.
internet, "This is what's gonna happen," but, so you can even sound smarter than the AI because you already know what they're gonna, expect the answer to be and be more clarifying in that, so that's interesting too. So we're gonna switch a little bit to, like, how can zoning rules, homeowner association requirements, and local ordinances affect an outdoor project before work even begins?
So that's a really great question. A lot of things wrapped up into that one for sure. I think sometimes the biggest project delays happen before we even start the project, right? Before the first shovel even hits the ground. HOAs may restrict work hours. Municipalities may require certain protections like tree protection or whatever. We talked about the dirts in that. Then you have zoning regulations that could affect setbacks, drainage, retaining walls, fencing, property lines, lighting. Well, I mean, we could go on, right? Accessories, structures, outdoor kitchens. Then let's throw in historic districts on top of that. They often have additional requirements. I mean, I was watching, as most in our industry, I love to watch some of the programs, not all, but some of them on like home shot, home HGTV and that. And they had one on there where this person owned their home and they were trying to remodel it with a contractor, and they not only were allowed they couldn't go out, they couldn't go up, they couldn't do this. It even affected when they had to put a problem on the inside to try to put air conditioning in. Imagine that. Imagine just running ductwork was even affected by the historical district. So again, if you don't ask these questions, you don't know. I think many contractors rely on owners to handle approvals, and I want to let you know that's very risky. So I always encourage contractors to verify all approvals before scheduling work. So a lot of times an owner may be pulling a permit or involved in the process. Still make sure it's done correctly because ultimately the liability is going to be back on you. It's much easier to delay a start date than it is to stop construction halfway through a project and try to regroup. So do your homework up front.
Yeah, that can really ruin a schedule, like all your critical paths and have it be, really upended by not having, the information on and permits that are correct. So I hear you there. So, what are some of the most common compliance mistakes small contractors make, and how can they avoid them without like an in house legal team?
Sure. So some of the biggest mistakes is trying to keep everything in someone's head. All right, happens all the time with small businesses. I started out in the industry where I was that small business and I ran all departments and I basically had my fingers in everything. And guess where all the information was? It was up here in my head. And I knew everything, but that doesn't do me any good because my company will suffer. So when you're doing in compliance, you must have a system. And I recommend, like everything else that I preach, is have simple systems. We don't need to have complicated. You don't need a large legal department, right? You need checklists, you need written procedures, document templates. Set it up so you're using the same processes and templates over. Tracking your permits, having records of your training, right? Training records. Make sure you're doing insurance reviews. I don't know what it likes to do it, but you've got to sit down and understand what insurance you have. You gotta have safety meetings. Now, the biggest thing, and I know, a plug on the outdoor coffee shop when I do a lot of work is the safety doing your safety job site toolbox talks and that. They're all available on there. Start making sure you're doing those because that's great documentation. Most successful contractors are definitely not experts in every regulation. I've been in this 45 years and plus, and the regulations still baffle me year after year. So you never can be that total expert in anything when you're trying to run an entire company. So there are experts that are creating repeatable processes that help them stay compliant. So don't keep everything in your head. Start small, like we've talked about in many other podcasts, and start building these systems out to help you operate better and more efficiently.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think with smaller contractors, The owner's done everything. And so it's all in their head because they've only had to rely on themselves. And so as you're building your company, it's dangerous not to have those systems. So, in order
Sure.
to even think to grow, you have to have a system in place to be able to accommodate that. Very true. Everything's in people's heads, at least it used to be. So now it's nice that there's so many systems available for people. So, what systems or habits can help a contractor stay current on changing laws and regulations throughout the year?
Yeah, that's a great question because we always think about January being a renewal of everything, and that's when the year starts. But we forget about most states actually laws and new regulations take place at different times of the year. It could be different May, it could be June, it could be July, it could be September. So how do you handle that? So I think the best contractors that I've worked with in seeing schedule compliance. So what do
Mm.
I mean by that? It becomes part of your business rhythm, part of your practice. So what I recommend is quarterly reviews. Review your insurance, review your licensing, review any OSHA updates, review employee documentations, review your contracts. You want to stay involved with your industry associations, extremely important. Continue to attend training. The best contractors I've seen out there, and the ones that I love when I do training events and they show up, say, "Well, I've been in this 30 years." And I'm like, "Well, why are you here?" Because I can always learn more. You get that mindset that I can always learn more, regardless how long you've been in it, then you're going to always be able to stay up with it. You want to participate in webinars. We forget about those. Well, I'm working during the day. Sign up for them. You get the repeat links. You can watch these things at your convenience, and you can fast forward through something that maybe doesn't pertain to you. Use them. They're there. You want to build relationships with your insurance broker, your CPAs, your attorneys, and trusted consultants. And let's talk about that for a minute. The biggest mistake that I find contractors make is on the attorney side. When I need an attorney, I go looking for an attorney. That is something you should do way ahead of time before I ever think I'm going to need somebody is go vet these people out, have them there. Yes, of course, your insurance broker and your CPA, you have much more contact with because they're working with you on a regular basis, and your attorney maybe not as much. And consultants, same thing. If you need to have somebody come in and audit your safety policies, whatever it may be, get all that done ahead of time. So and understand nobody can know everything. That's impossible. But every contractor absolutely can build a team that helps them to stay informed.
Yeah, that's such great advice, especially preparing and having a lawyer that you trust. Building vetting that is so important, and having them get to know your business. I think really can help when it
Absolutely.
comes into play for sure. So looking ahead, what compliance trends would contractors, what should they be watching for in the next year or so?
Well, this will be great if we'll see how well we get this a year from now when we come back and look at it. But I,
I know, right?
I think that we're going to continue to see greater accountability through documentation. I think digital record keeping is will become the expectation rather than the exception. So I think you gotta get onto it, and it really is great. Once it timestamps it, you can't change records without people knowing it. It takes all that away. So I think what you wanna get this on for digital record keeping is your safety documentation, your training record. Don't forget about your equipment inspections. That's a big one if there's an accident or a problem, how often do you maintain your equipment? Your environmental reporting, now that is not always overwhelming, but make sure when you're required to keep records on environmental problems, issues, daily reporting on your projects, you keep them. And labor compliance. I can't stress enough that I think contractors' number one hits that they're getting is from local state labor compliance boards. They're coming in and auditing them, and they're catching them on the subcontractor versus employee and the overtime rate. Remember, if you pay piecework, which happens in all our construction industries, that you are have to be in compliance that it meets minimum wage, and if someone works beyond 8 hours in a day, they're required to pay overtime, which piecework does not take in account. This is all things that will come back to you. So labor compliance is an easy one to stay on top of, but also you wanna make sure that you're doing it correctly. The other thing I'm seeing more technology is helping contractors manage compliance automatically, reminders, all there's a lot of good things out there now in software. So that's a positive development. And then finally, I believe owners and municipalities are going to continue to expect higher professionalism from contractors. And the companies that build compliance into their operations today are going to be much better positioned to grow tomorrow. And at the end of the day, compliance isn't about paperwork. It's about running a professional business that protects you, both your employees, your customers, and your reputation.
Wow. That is so well said, John Kenney. So I think, yeah, I mean, everything you've talked about is so valuable. I think that it's interesting, how technology plays a role, and obviously, having a digital tracking for everything that you're doing. And I think it was overwhelming, even 5 years ago for some of the owners, and, now we're in second and third generation of things. And I think that the newer the kids come on out of school, have such a, it's so important to utilize them and not think, "Oh, they don't know the trade, they don't know this," but they bring so much other value to the company by being adaptable to the digital age. So, it's something to really think about, because there's people right there, within your company that can really dig into that and be successful and help with organizing and making sure that you are compliant and making sure that you are following all regulations. So I think that's very interesting too. Go ahead.
Now, I say if I could wrap, I just want to do one closing statement because if
Yes, I was
anybody
going to ask
fast
you.
forward or you're to the end
Mm.
and you want to take this away, and this is very simple. So, if I could leave contractors with one piece of advice off of this podcast that we just did, it would be this: don't look at compliance as government paperwork, which we do. Okay, look at it as good business management. Companies that stay organized, document consistently, train their people, and build reputable systems don't look you're not just avoiding fines. You're actually building a stronger, more profitable business. And that's really what compliance should be about.
Well said. Well said. So if people want to get a hold of you, John, what's the best way to do that?
Well, they can go right to the outdoor coffee shop, and I have a directory on there. You can actually reach me direct if you prefer. You can email me at jkenny@cotneyconsulting.com.
Absolutely. And he's on all of our coffee shops. So if you or other people in other trades, he's on all of our Roofers Coffee Shop, Coatings Coffee Shop, Metal Coffee Shop. He's been just a resource, a valuable resource for all the coffee shops. So I want to thank you again for being here today. This has always been, it's fun to talk and catch up with you as well. So thanks again for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me back.
All right. So that concludes our episode today, and enjoy your day until next time. Take care.